Hey guys, it's me, Pete. Who else would it be? It's my show, after all. I just wanted to tell you about my sponsorship partner this month, GiveWell.org. When I first started the show, I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do about advertising, but I knew that if I was going to advertise anything, talk about any product or service on the show, I'd really have to believe in it. I have to keep my conscience clear as much as I can about the way that I earn a living to support my family, which is why I was really excited to partner with GiveWell.org. About 5 years ago, I interviewed moral philosopher Peter Singer on the show, and he talked to me about an idea called effective altruism. How can you donate money to charities and projects that save and improve lives the most per dollar? Well, that's exactly what GiveWell does. GiveWell has based their entire organization on this idea of effective altruism. And for over 10 years, GiveWell.org has helped donors find the charities and projects that save and improve lives the most per dollar. How do they do that? Well, they dedicate over 20,000 hours a year researching charitable organizations and handpick a few of the highest impact evidence-backed charities. And all that research, by the way, is available for free on their website. And more importantly, GiveWell never takes any fees, so all of your tax-deductible donations are given to the charity that you choose. And this month, I'm donating to the Against Malaria Foundation because GiveWell has vetted them and knows that it costs about $5 to provide one mosquito net to prevent malaria. It costs about $7 to treat a child through the malarial high season, and GiveWell estimates that every $3,000 to $5,000 donated will save a life of a child under 5. But there are several different organizations that GiveWell researches and suggests that you can choose. So just go to givewell.org/standup right now. givewell.org/standup. If you want your donation to have even more impact, act soon. Any of our listeners who become new GiveWell donors will have their first donation matched up to $250 when you go to givewell.org/standup and select my podcast, Stand Up with Pete Dominick, at checkout. This matching offer good for only as long as funds offer, and it's a special chance for even a small donation to make a big impact. Get your first donation matched up to $250. Go to givewell.org/standup. You want your donation to help as much as possible during this giving season. So donate to givewell.org now. All right, this is episode 249 of Stand Up. Joining me today to talk national security, the Russian hacks on the Treasury Department, and how we fight the anti-vaxxer theory. Clint Watts will join me, former FBI, former Army, and also joining me from The Atlantic magazine, one of the smartest journalists and writers I read and know, the great Derek Thompson is my guest. I am Pete Dominick. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hey guys, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking me along the ride with you through your journey in life today, and thank you for being a part of the stand-up community. If you're a paid subscriber, you can join me this Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we will welcome special guest Tim Wise to talk about his new collection of his essays, Dispatches from the Race War. That's this Thursday night at 8 East. And you can always join us on the Discord platform, where you are never alone if you are a member and subscriber of the stand-up community. Also, thank you for all the nature pictures. People just keep sending them along. I must have got 15 or 20 of them today. Remember, no man-made objects in your photos, and I feel like some people are cheating and going back and finding some of their favorite photos that they've ever taken. And I feel like another rule should be, it's got to be from very recently, like today-ish, because I like to share my favorite with the morning email for stand-up subscribers. If you're a subscriber, you also get the morning email from me. And some of you said that you are subscribers on Patreon and you aren't getting that email. Check your settings and make sure that you haven't turned it off or that you have to turn it on. Get that vitamin N, get that nature, and send it to me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, or tweet it to me at Pete Dominick, and I will share them with everybody if you don't mind. Send me your vitamin N. Get it too. Real important. Okay, lots to get to this first segment. So much to discuss with you today. Of course, Joe Biden was officially elected for the 73rd time when the electors met across the country. It was D-Day for vaccination. The first Americans were vaccinated today. And the Attorney General, Bill Barr, was fired/resigned. Anybody's best guess. Not to mention several other stories, but in this first segment, I think I'm going to start calling yesterday's audio. Play a few clips for you that are relevant from all of the top stories yesterday. And let's start with Joe Biden, who gave a very well-received speech last night, even though he had a frog in his throat the entire time. I'm not sure if anybody ever gave him a swig of water, but a lot of people were talking about that. Nonetheless, it was impactful and important, and he, of course, first made mention that America has crossed a horrific threshold of 300,000 dead of COVID-19 as of yesterday. Here is the president-elect, Joe Biden.
Today, our nation passed a grim milestone, 300,000 deaths due to this COVID virus. My heart goes out to each of you in this dark winter of the pandemic, about to spend the holidays and the new year with a black hole in your hearts, without the ones you loved at your side. My heart goes out to all of you who have fallen in hard times through no fault of your own, unable to sleep at night, staring at the ceiling, and weighed down by the worry of what tomorrow will bring for you, and equally important for your family. But we've faced difficult times before in our history. I know we'll get through this one, but together. That's how we get through it, together. So as we start the hard work to be done, may this moment give us the strength to rebuild this house of ours.
How about that, everybody? Something called empathy and leadership from Joe Biden. The Washington Post Matt Visor says the speech represented to date Biden's most forceful defense of the election, as well as his most complete denunciation of Trump's fraudulent claims. Biden noted that he received 7 million more popular votes, the same number of electoral votes, 306, as Trump did in 2016, when he claimed a, quote, landslide. And the 14 or so minute speech, the president-elect also took aim at Donald Trump and his campaign's desperate attempts at legal action and recourse.
The Trump campaign brought dozens and dozens and dozens of legal challenges to test the result. They were heard again and again. And each of the time they were heard, they were found to be without merit. Time and again, President Trump's lawyers presented arguments to state officials, state legislatures, state and federal courts, and ultimately to the United States Supreme Court twice. They were heard by more than 80 judges across this country, and in every case, no cause or evidence was found to reverse or question or dispute the results. A few states went for recounts. All the counts were confirmed. The results in Georgia were counted 3 times. Didn't change the outcome. The recount conducted in Wisconsin actually saw our margin grow. The margin we had in Michigan was 14 times the margin President Trump won that state by 4 years ago. Our margin in Pennsylvania was nearly twice the size of the Trump margin 4 years ago. And yet, none of this has stopped baseless claims about the legitimacy of the results. Even more stunning, 17 Republican attorneys general and 126 Republican members of the Congress actually signed on to a lawsuit filed by the state of Texas. That lawsuit asked the United States Supreme Court to reject the certified vote counts in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. This legal maneuver was an effort by elected officials and one group of states to try to get the Supreme Court to wipe out the votes of more than 20 million Americans in other states, and to hand the presidency to a candidate who lost the Electoral College, lost the popular vote, and lost each and every one of the states whose votes they were trying to reverse. It's a position so extreme, we've never seen it before. A position that refused to respect the will of the people, refused to respect the rule of law, and refused to honor our Constitution.
And then right at that point, seriously, this is crazy, it went viral on Twitter. A frog jumped out of Joe Biden's mouth. It apparently was stuck in his throat for the majority of that speech, which shows just how much he has had to overcome in his life. Biden's 306 electoral votes have been finalized. He won by 7 million votes, or 51.3%, the highest percentage, by the way, for a challenger since FDR in 1932. He also won Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin by 3 times Trump's margin in 2016, as you heard him just reference there. And Trump, for his part, he lost 49 court cases and found 0 evidence of fraud. Getting that information from reporter Ari Berman's Twitter feed. Meanwhile, as a way to distract from what was happening in the country today, anytime he is not getting attention, Donald Trump manufactures something, a speech, a press conference, an announcement, or often actually a firing or an announcement of a hiring. Today, it was a firing. We found out that his loyal soldier, his second Attorney General that was confirmed, and Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo body double, Bill Barr, was being fired or resigned. It depends on how you look at it. So a lot of people thought that that news came as a way to distract from the electors certifying the election for Joe Biden and that speech that he just gave. But here is Harry Lippman with expert analysis, because he is, after all, former deputy assistant attorney general on MSNBC last night, where Chris Hayes, host of All In, asked him, "What do you make of it all, Harry?"
Well, first, I don't think the timing is accidental, Chris, as you say. So it's an immediate news story to substitute once the electors have voted. What do I make of it? I make that he was permitted to resign, that he wouldn't take this last hill for Donald Trump. He has to date been the closest attorney general to the president in many years. He's bent norms. He's bent laws. He's bent the truth. But Barr wouldn't take this last hill and wouldn't tell Trump, who probably doesn't even understand what the law is about, that he could win this election fraud fight. And Trump has a short memory and a long, nasty streak. And I think he just said, well, Bill, you're not with me now, and you have to go. I think he eased him out early as a kind of either retribution or didn't want him with him for this most important fight that maybe in Trump's mind, he still thinks he is waging.
Everybody reacting, of course, to Bill Barr's second run at Attorney General coming to an end. John Avlon tweets, "Trump's firing of Barr is just the latest reminder of what Winston Churchill said about the futility of appeasement. It's like feeding a crocodile hoping it eats you last." Ooh, that's a good quote. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, author and expert on authoritarianism and history, she writes, "Bill Barr will try and cleanse his reputation, but he's a dangerous individual who tried to subvert our democratic freedoms. One example, in March 2020, he requested that Congress grant the Department of Justice the ability to ask judges to detain people indefinitely without trial. That's what juntas do." Adam Serwer, "The irony of Bill Barr, an executive power fanatic exclusively where Republican presidents are concerned, is that he treated Biden more fairly than Comey treated Clinton because he cared less what the Republicans, the GOP, thought of him." I thought that was a really interesting take because, of course, James Comey was the FBI, head of the FBI, not the attorney general. But either way, both of them had the ability to tell the public that they were investigating either the candidate, Hillary Clinton, or in this case, the candidate's son, Hunter Biden. And that's the other reason why people are saying that Trump fired Bill Barr, because he didn't announce that he was investigating Hunter Biden before the election, which is exactly out of Trump's playbook, what he got impeached for. He told the Ukraine to launch an investigation just to say that they're doing an investigation to sow doubt around Joe Biden. That's exactly what he wanted his attorney general to do, but he didn't. I'm excited to read some long-form columns and essays and think pieces about all the horrible things that Bill Barr did as Attorney General, not only this time, but the last time. Not a good guy. Yeah. Okay, so moving on, let's listen a little bit more of yesterday's audio. Here is Senator Mitt Romney calling out Trump's election fraud claims on CNBC yesterday.
"I thought I was going to win, too, when I ran for president in 2012. I didn't. I didn't go out and say fraud. That's, we have a process. We count the votes. That's the way it is. And I'm concerned that the cause of democracy here, as well as around the world, people look to us. We're the democratic leader of the world. What's going on now, I'm afraid, is terribly dispiriting to people all over the globe."
Mitt Romney making more good points. Good for him. Yeah. That he's going to get into Mormon heaven. And speaking of how people see it around the world, here is a view from British broadcaster at the BBC. I think a lot of people were sharing this yesterday because it's just an interesting perspective to hear it come out of some foreign political analyst's mouth, especially when he's British, because the British always sound smart.
It's another day for America's democracy. The president's making baseless accusations of electoral fraud and attempts to steal the election. His son Eric is pushing misinformation about ballot burning when there's no evidence that that is happening. His campaign is launching multiple lawsuits to stop vote counting when the counting of votes after Election Day is a standard part of the electoral process. And international election observers are accusing the president of a gross abuse of office. Now, Donald Trump repeatedly attacked America's democratic process during the campaign, so the last 2 days are not entirely a surprise, but reaction around the world shows us the president still has the capacity to shock. For better or for worse, this is not American democracy as people normally see it.
Oh, great. That sounded great. A view from around the world. That's how they see us. And CNN dug up this audio, which I thought was interesting, of Al Gore after he lost the election by 500 votes in Florida. And, of course, he was the vice president, and he has to oversee this process, and Vice President Mike Pence is going to have to oversee this process. I think it's January 6th. And some Democrats did not want to confirm. And here's how the former vice president and guy who just lost to stupid George W. Bush by 500 votes, Al Gore, handled it.
Mr. President, and I take great pride in calling you that. I must object because of the overwhelming evidence of official misconduct, deliberate fraud, and an attempt to suppress voter turnout. The chair must remind members that under Section 18 of Title III, United States Code, no debate is allowed in the joint session.
I have an objection to the electoral votes from Florida.
Is the objection in writing? Is it signed by a member of the House of Representatives and a senator?
No, it is not in writing, but I rise in solidarity with my colleagues who have previously expressed their objection.
The chair thanks the gentleman from Illinois, but hey.
Yeah, rough situation. How is Mike Pence going to handle it? Because he may still want to run for president, and if he doesn't bullshit his way through that process, the Trumpers are going to abandon him for good. That is going to be entertaining and also probably tragic and really, really divisive. Well, the good news, of course, is that the vaccine has been rolled out. That's right. The first doses of a vaccine have been administered in the U.S. Here is ICU nurse Sandra Lindsay telling the Associated Press after getting her shot in Long Island Jewish Medical Center in New York.
I feel hopeful today, relieved. I feel like healing is coming. I hope this marks the beginning to the end of a very painful time in our history. I want to instill public confidence that the vaccine is safe. We're in a pandemic, and so we all need to do our parts.
She makes a great point about how we all need to do our parts, and one part is getting on board with this vaccine, understanding how the science around its creation and security and safety were designed, influenced, and funded. And leaders of all types are doing just that. The chairman of the U.S. Bishops' Doctrine and Pro-Life Committees came out with a statement saying receiving the COVID-19 vaccine ought to be understood as an act of charity toward the other members of our community. In this way, being vaccinated safely against COVID-19 should be considered an act of love of our neighbor and part of our moral responsibility for the common good. And then they shifted around a whole bunch of pedophile priests. I'm sorry. That was wrong. That was unfair. I'm happy that this organization has come out with such a clear statement that is pro-vaccine. Rachel Maddow had Joe Biden's chief of staff on, Ron Klain. Ron Klain handled the Ebola epidemic for Obama, and Rachel Maddow asked him about his mixed emotions on this day where the vaccine is being rolled out, but people are, of course, still dying every minute. Here's Ron Klain.
Well, Rachel, as you said, it's both a great day and a horrific day on the front of the battle against COVID. The first vaccination given is obviously a sign of hope. But the record number of cases today and the 300,000 death milestone is a reminder that we're still in the middle of what will be a very, very, very dark winter. There are, literally probably tens of thousands of deaths left before the end of the year, and more deaths after that. And the saddest thing at all, Rachel, is while we're waiting for this vaccine to be deployed, manufactured, distributed, there are simple things we could do now that would radically change the course of this virus. All Americans could wear masks. We could socially distance. We could wash our hands. We could do the things we need to do to bring this virus under control. The vaccine is hope. The vaccine is the end point. But full vaccination of the country is still months and months away, and it's in our hands and in the hands of the government in Washington, our leaders around the country, to save lives between now and then.
I do have to say, I don't know about you, but I feel so much better when there are adults in charge that have the interests of the American public on their mind as they go to work every day, not their own interests or fear of the boss. I mean, Ron Klain is a very, very respected, super intelligent guy, and it's great that he is Joe Biden's chief of staff, in my opinion, if you ask me. I mean, I think he's better than Reince Priebus. Okay, that is yesterday's audio, and now it is time for the rest of the headlines that are not necessarily COVID-related or directly politically related. It's time for the news dump.
They call them dumps, big, massive dumps.
I'm going to start with a rare weather story because here in the Northeast, we are getting set to get hammered by the biggest snowstorm in years. Winter storm watches and advisory have been issued across the Northeast for what's shaping up to be the most significant winter storm in several years, according to AccuWeather.com, even with travel being limited amid the coronavirus pandemic. The storm, which has yet to still fully take shape, could potentially become highly impactful and disruptive as the first round of coronavirus vaccines continue to be shipped around the country. Yikes. Weather and vaccine transportation. Drive safe. Those guys driving that vaccine around in bad weather, and I insinuate they're all guys, sorry about that. Anybody who is delivering this vaccine is also a hero, and we're about to get hit by a foot of snow. Here's some entertainment news. Director Zack Snyder's cut of the movie Justice League might get an R-rated theatrical release. Director Zack Snyder says his 4-hour superhero epic may get a theatrical release complete with an F-bomb dropping Batman. Holy fuck, Batman. And in nature news, the Trump administration is expected to announce a decision on whether to designate the monarch butterfly as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. Monarch butterfly was added to the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Red List of threatened species in 2014 after it was determined that 90% of its population had declined from its original levels. When asked to consider the monarch butterfly as endangered, Trump said, "What's a butterfly? I know that's how I like my steaks. Okay? Aren't they gay?" The beloved monarch butterfly, says ABC News, has died off due to increased use of farm herbicides, climate change, and the destruction of milkweed plants, which is what monarch caterpillars eat and where monarch butterflies lay their eggs, according to the Associated Press. This next story was a big story in my house on Monday morning when my daughter said, school's canceled because Google's Classroom is down. Gmail and YouTube were down briefly as Google suffered a brief outage yesterday. Google users in the U.S., Europe, and India and other parts of the world were briefly unable to access their Gmail accounts, watch YouTube videos, or get their online documents. Tens of thousands of complaints popped up around 7 a.m. when my daughters were waking up to get ready for online school. But unfortunately for my daughters, Google figured it out, and the problem appeared to be cleared up just before school started at 8 a.m. By the way, there's a website called Down Detector, which tracks website outages. They reported a problem affected users around the world, so look into that if you're curious if your favorite sites and apps are down. Down Detector. And there is a new Guinness World Record for largest afro. A 32-year-old Brooklyn fashion designer has just broken the Guinness World Record for largest afro for a female whose afro measured 4 feet and 10 inches in circumference. Simone Williams says her hair has always attracted a lot of attention, and when she found out that she had broken the record, she was in disbelief. She said, "This record is definitely something I think I have a lot of confidence and pride in. When I first decided to go natural, there was no one I could really look up to. Congratulations, Simone Williams. You have broken the Guinness World Record for largest afro." I wonder if there's a record for baldest. I think I'm going to enter that category. And finally, a disgusting story coming out of Wisconsin where apparently they have a traditional holiday dish called the cannibal sandwich. I'd never heard of it, but apparently every year a holiday favorite in Wisconsin is a cannibal sandwich. Wisconsin residents are being urged by health officials to pass on eating this traditional holiday dish to avoid getting sick because the cannibal sandwich is just raw ground beef with sliced onions, salt, and pepper. And guess what? According to the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, eating raw meat is never recommended because of the bacteria it can contain. Many Wisconsin families consider these horrible cannibal sandwiches to be a holiday tradition, but eating them poses a threat for salmonella, E. coli, and so much more. Listeria, you don't do it. Please cook your beef is the PSA here. Cook your beef, Wisconsinites, and stop telling people about the cannibal sandwich. All right, that is your news dump. Brought to you by GiveWell.org. GiveWell.org/standup. All right, let me get to my first guest today. Coming up, Derek Thompson from the Atlantic Magazine. We had an awesome conversation. Lots to discuss with him. But first, it's former U.S. Army infantry officer, former FBI special agent, executive officer at the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, who's also an analyst supporting U.S. intelligence community, U.S. Special Operations Command. He's an author and commentator. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and so much more. His first book is excellent. It's titled Messing with the Enemy, Surviving in Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News. And he's now a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and non-resident fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy. You can find him on Twitter. He's also, I should say, national security contributor for NBC News. Find him on Twitter at Selected Wisdom. Had an awesome conversation with Clint Watts about the hacking, the Russian hacking of the Treasury and Commerce Departments, and why experts like him and others need to do everything they can to fight the conspiracy theories around vaccines. That is coming up right now. All right, the perfect guest for today. I had Clint Watts, because Clint can talk both about the Russian attack on the federal government, another attack, and also we need to talk about COVID-19 vaccine conspiracies with Clint, because he's just written a piece for his organization on the website, fpri.org, which I've told you about. COVID-19 vaccine conspiracies and the next wave of disinformation. Two very, very important topics. Clint, I'm so glad you were available for a few minutes with me today. Why don't you get situated, sir? The whole time I've been talking, Clint has been shifting around.
The light is weird because it's snowing outside. So everything's dark. So, it's super personal to me because I have a daughter with autism. And so 10 years ago, I was struggling with, 12 years ago, I was struggling with how do you do vaccines? That was the heart of the anti-vax movement around it causing autism. Yeah. And I talked in the book, it's sort of a conclusion, how I felt the disinformation wave, right? Or misinformation more. People didn't know it was false, but they believed it. And I was worried about autism to where I had friends in the military that were like, look, you cannot give your kids all the vaccines at once, right? Like you have to space them out. And so I went through this period where I was like, okay, I want single dose because I want to, make sure that it's not too much and we'll space them out. I was trying to do these things. I really didn't have the power to overrule the doctors. And then my daughter it was clear she had autism by about 13, 14 months. And she got diagnosed at, I think it was like 20 months at Boston Children's Hospital. And, I went in, and the very first thing, we had the best doctor on autism in the world. We lucked out, who assessed my daughter. And he said, look, I'm going to tell you right now, this was not caused by vaccines, and that your daughter needs to get vaccinated, and that you're going to walk out of here and you're going to Google more and more about autism, looking these things up. And it's nonsense. We have explored it. We'll continue to explore. We have no evidence to support that. And that's the disinfo barrier, right? You can encounter an expert. He is the top person in this field. And I got lucky. And then I just was like clear of it. For the rest of my time, I was like, I'm not going to listen to this. But over the last 12 years, it's been a relentless query or push at me like, hey, your daughter got it because of vaccines, right? Or do you think it was because of vaccines? Just endless push. And so now it's interesting watching how our nation and really the world's future hinges on how quickly we can get this vaccine out to people and we can reach a form of herd immunity. And when I watch the conspiracies, it's some of the same people I encountered 12 years ago, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also this sort of movement of populism that we've seen on social media 2016 to 2020 around the election, QAnon, those sorts of things that are rife with this. And then you see this sort of foreign manipulation behind the scenes of like nation states, Russia, China, criticizing Western vaccines for their own purposes. And for some reason, there's a group of online accounts that really have it out for Pfizer, right? Like they're really going after the Pfizer vaccine, trying to erode confidence to where now we have just created the most rapid vaccine in world history, right? Like it's pretty remarkable what's been achieved. And we've got people getting stuck with the vaccine today. And our biggest fear now is like, we can't get everybody to 70% or more because they're of this disinformation, this misinformation. And so I think for 2021 and 2020, it was election disinformation. 2021, it's going to be vaccine. That's really where it's all heading. You could see as the election conspiracies were kind of dying out a couple of weeks ago and only the nuttiest of the nutters, were kind of believing it at this point, right? That guy Rich from Big and Rich, right? He was betting $10,000 or something.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's also sometimes I feel like it's hard to know if people really believe what they are saying from that guy to Mitch McConnell to the MyPillow guy to the president's lawyers Giuliani, and it's sometimes I think they really believe it all, and that might be an example of it. But there's a billion questions to ask you about everything that you just said. But I think the first one is, so you're saying that there are nation states trying to create confusion in the United States of America and sow doubt about vaccines. Why would another country? What would their interest be? We're all in this together.
We're not in it together this time. We've had what we call
on the issue of the virus, which spreads across borders, which we're not in it on that.
No, I think it's really been fascinating to watch. Normally, this would have been like, let's buy the world a Coke moment, if you rewound 10 years and you would see nations be like, let's go to the UN and come up with solutions. And what are we going to do collectively? And because of the nature of America today, that just didn't happen. Right. And so it quickly became we call it the infodemic, around the pandemic, meaning an info war between the nations and between parties around the virus, which now is essentially the infodemic around the vaccines. China was the source of it. As soon as it became clear, it was like the U.S. was going to point fingers at China, which we should have to a degree. That became info war, and it has gone on all the way through. And so for China, they still are trying to cast doubt around the source of where COVID-19 came from. And at the same point, they want to be leading the world and particularly in their sphere, and they want to be the one to stop COVID-19. They want the vaccine for their own people. They got the most people on the planet of any country. Russia, Sputnik 5 is their vaccine, which I think was tested on like 12 people before they launched or something. It's pretty crazy, right? It wasn't really flushed out, but for them, it's political. They want to be first, but also they want to slow the U.S. essentially getting the vaccine and getting past the pandemic. And the third thing is it's financial. Different countries are selling or their companies are selling that vaccine to other countries. And so there's a lot of incentives for competition right now.
This piece covers a lot that you wrote. I think it's really important. But you talk about the twin forces creating the COVID-19 vaccine disinformation storm. And you also earlier delineated between misinformation and disinformation. And I think that's important because sometimes you don't realize the thing that you're reading is disinformation and you pass it along, which is why it becomes misinformation. So many people are being misinformed about this, but what are the forces creating this, as you call it, disinformation storm?
Yeah. So two things make it particularly powerful. One, there's been an organic anti-vax community for more than a decade that has coalesced online and has been fighting for anti-vax principles and issues. That is already there. So they're naturally primed audience for being delivered conspiracies because they need it to propel their belief system. They're receptive to it. People like information that confirms what they already believe, confirmation bias. So in social media, that's easy then if you're a manipulator to step in and use that to your advantage. So we saw this during mask and lockdowns. We saw this during George Floyd protests. We saw this during where the source of COVID-19 is. If you're an outside manipulator right now, motivated politically or wanting to drive wedges socially, or you got a fake cure that you want to keep selling, there are a lot of reasons to push COVID-19 disinformation, even if you know it's false. And I think when you bring those two worlds together, you start to see them feed off of one another. And that's really, I think, the big concern going into next year. And there's ample evidence of this. 5G was an example from last spring. I think you and I talked about, right?
Yeah, the conspiracy theory about 5G, which I first heard of from my conspiracy theory believing cousin. She's warning me about it. And she's like, look at the map. It's everywhere. And I was like, no, that's a map of the population of the country. That's not a map. Yes. It's not. That's why.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a lot of questions based on that as well. I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes because I want to make sure I cover this. So, but right now, it seems like we're more vulnerable for this than ever before in the history of humanity. Whenever there were these kinds of pandemics, there were always people, humans, shysters, snake oil salesmen, trying to make a buck, trying to confuse you. But the internet makes everything so much worse. Social media makes everything so much worse because that message, which is appealing to some because maybe it provides hope, travels so much faster than it did in earlier periods of humanity. What can we do as nation states, as governments, as social media, and the private sector, as individuals to combat this misinformation?
So I think there's a plethora of things. One, we need to pay attention to scientists and experts. You know, they are the ones we should be going to. And this is where the damaging era of the Trump administration, where they've undermined every doctor to where you don't know what to believe. We need them right now, and we need to believe them. I think the second thing is we do have to lean on the vaccine companies. They're the ones that made it, and the vaccine companies need to be transparent. And I have to say, I've seen a remarkable amount, both Pfizer and Moderna, of them trying to say, like, this is what's in the vaccine. This is how it was made. Here's some data about it. Here's what it actually means. And I was super impressed yesterday. I didn't catch the doctor's name, but I was on MSNBC. There was a doctor on before me. She was excellent at kind of breaking down the conspiracies, explaining the process that's out there. I think the next part is the rumor control website that we have from the Department of Homeland Security that got Chris Krebs, in a lot of hot water with the president, should just pivot and become the vaccine conspiracy refutation site for the government and work with Health and Human Services. It's a known debunking site. It's got an audience already, and we use that to put out, honest and truthful information, explain the process, immediately refute those conspiracies when they arise.
I think the first part you said was basically, I could call it effective scientific communication from trusted individuals. Just have an army of experts that are really good at communicating and taking questions. I've seen a lot of them, and I've been talking to them for years myself, but now is the time to roll those folks out. And as far as the latter part, I got to ask you, in terms of, before we let you go, the hacking, I want to just mention that the Russians apparently, I'm trying to connect it to the last question. Now I realize what it was. You said Krebs. Chris Krebs ran this agency. What was that agency, and how much do you think about the fact that he was fired and then this hack occurs, or maybe it was underway? Because I thought it was that agency that's supposed to be watching these hacks. So connecting that guy that you just mentioned to this most recent Russian hack, and I'm sorry that was such a hackish way to put this question to you.
No, it's good. So DHS created this group called CISA, and the acronym is CISA, and I believe it's Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency. So CISA is essentially in place to help raise awareness and defend U.S. critical infrastructure at home from cyber attack and intrusions. They would be the ones that would be relaying information out to all agencies across U.S. government about how to do protection, and all agencies, citizens across the U.S. about how to protect themselves. And so while all of our election defense efforts were going on, it appears the Russians hit at least 3 targets and maybe more. One was FireEye, a major cybersecurity company. It's one of the best for protecting against Russia. And so that's an interesting target. And they were the first, I think it was last week or the week before, to discuss, hey, we got hit by the Russians. Here's kind of what was lost. And then what we learned over the weekend was the Department of the Treasury and Department of Commerce, and particularly a unit in the Department of Commerce, it sounds like, which is about national telecommunications. And that agency is the one doing everything from like national policy in the U.S. to how we interface with other governments around technology. So this would be essential in the Huawei versus the United States battle that's kind of going on right now.
Right.
And so it seems the Russians were in there maybe as long ago as the springtime, been taking information. And so the question then is, what were they after, or what did they gain? And that's critical information probably around our long-term national strategy on how we'll deploy technology, what apps we might ban, what companies might be on blacklist, how we'll go about working with like the United Kingdom, maybe against Huawei, very strategic sort of things, which if you know that, one, you can make a very strong market play, betting on for against different companies, for example, in the technology space. But two, you can figure out, okay, this is what the Americans are onto in terms of telecommunications. And the Russians, going way back into the Soviet era, have always tried to hack into, steal secrets about telecommunications technologies because they're always behind, and they would love to be in every network or slowing down the advance of every network.
And so how do we know that it's the Russians? I think Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, yeah, the Russians are bad, but also China's really bad, and it could have been China.
So I was on air when this came out, and immediately I was like, okay, there's only 2 countries that really care enough about this information they could do something with it, and it's China and Russia.
Right.
And then I was not surprised at all that within the hour it was out that it was Russia. The signatures of the hackers, meaning how they went about the hack and the tools they used, and the code they essentially used, traced back to what's known as the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russians. And we have a lot of signatures of them, to include back election 2016. And so there's plenty of fingerprints now. When these guys do hacks, we tend to know once we get the fingerprints, back here in the States.
Really important development. And there's, I can't imagine what kind of concerns knowing what you know would have about what they could do with that information. And also just interesting to think about the history of espionage, where you would have a spy that would get a file or a number of files, and that would be a massive break, or get some kind of information from an asset, another person. That could be huge as well. But now, you can hack into an entire system and get all of the emails and get the real in-depth thinking. It makes me wonder how much information is shared in emails, or if it was how much information is online and available that's important for someone to hack into to begin with.
Yeah. I actually wrote up a story once, and I was like, imagine Russian spies broke into Colin Powell's house, opened his private safe, and stole all the files, ran back to Russia and printed them in a newspaper. How would we respond? And we would probably freak out, right? We would go crazy. That all happened in the digital space of 2016, and we didn't do anything. So it's interesting, like how our mindset changes. Like Colin Powell's email was essentially hacked into, all of his personal communications were, put out. This guy's a former Secretary of State, right? And we go, wow, it's cyber. So, okay. It's interesting how we change it. It's the same thing. You're right, Pete. It is no different than sending a spy in to ruffle through a file cabinet and taking all the contents. But we just have a very different frame of mind about it.
To be clear, when you keep saying we, you're talking really about, I think you're talking specifically uniquely about the Trump administration. Republicans and Democrats in prior administrations, certainly on, say, the important committee members in both the House and the Senate, would generally speaking retaliate against some kind of hack or infiltration or espionage. In general, there was wide agreement on reacting to it. It's new that we aren't reacting to, in this case specifically, Russian hacking and invasions, right?
And it takes on particular resonance right now. We're talking about an Assange and or Snowden pardon, in the next day or weeks, right? Like
Yeah, that was my last question. What do you? Those are mostly rumors, I guess. I thought it was, but what do you think about it?
Look, if it's going to happen, it has to happen in the next month, right? So any activists or anybody that's supportive of those two is going to go all out over the next 30 days because Trump's their last hope, in that space. It's interesting. Assange was charged for directing someone to steal. That is not journalism, right? You kind of hear this retort. He was just a journalist and helping people know the truth. And it's like, well, he was actually, if you believe the indictment, he was directing Chelsea Manning to break into things and steal things and telling them what to steal. That is espionage or theft, like depending on the category of actor that you're looking at. With Snowden, he knew what he was doing. He told us that, and he deliberately stole information and took it and gave it to a foreign entity, which was then published. And it sounds as if, we'll see. I hope it gets to close at some point, that he gave the information to a foreign power. So that would be espionage / theft, right? Like, it depends on what the code is and how you're trying to charge it. And so it really speaks to the ends justify the means, sort of arguments around how we feel about this stuff over time.
Well, I'm just concerned that Donald Trump never gives anything for nothing. And the idea that him pardoning Assange in return for Julian Assange having an internet connection again is, I think, deeply disconcerting, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. Look, this is the guy who tried to get Donald Trump a victory, right? Like, this is the same as rewarding the Russians. The information Assange got came from the Russians, right? Like, this is not a new or surprising development. I just think it speaks to how far, like, as a country, we've gone where being the president is really about just achieving your interest and not the country's interest, overall. It sets a very bizarre precedent for everybody after Assange, which is, if I think my cause is good enough, it's totally okay to steal, right? Or break the law or direct someone to. It puts journalism in a really weird spot over time, right? Because that's been the debate about Assange is like, how is he any different than the New York Times reporter who gets secrets delivered to them, right? That's Glenn Greenwald, who's down, I guess, in Brazil now or wherever he's at. Who is kind of he would say he was not encouraging, but he was welcoming with open arms things that were secrets are pulled out, from different organizations or companies or businesses. And so where is that line between journalism and theft and espionage and those sorts of things? Once you start directing people, which is what they claim Assange did in the indictment, then that's theft or espionage.
I so appreciate your time today, as always, Clint Watts, and everybody should check out in the show links all the links to Clint's work and his most recent piece, which everybody should share. I'm going to right now, about COVID-19 vaccine conspiracies and the next wave of disinformation. Is really interesting, helpful. And go to fpri.org as well and support them and Clint's amazing team. Thank you, sir.
Can I add one thing?
No.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
No, add it, please.
Chapter 10 has the autism discussion about vaccines, which we talked about today.
Yep.
Chapter 5 is about Assange. So I'll
go reread
both topics in one book.
I'll go reread both of those and make sure to plug the book again, and then we'll talk about both of those hopefully next time, because there's so much in your book that I haven't specifically addressed, and unfortunately, in a way, it's all still relevant.
I know. It would probably be good if my book was irrelevant. It would be a better day.
Right. All right, buddy. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, another awesome conversation with Clint Watts. That's what you're paying for, my network of amazing people that are willing to chat with me for a few minutes every day. His book, by the way, is Messing with the Enemy, Surviving in a Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News. And by the way, I realize not all of you are paying. You're listening to this podcast for free, and I'm working away so diligently every day in my shed here in my backyard, creating this conversation and information for you. So please consider signing up for a subscription, because yes, it's free, but it's not cheap. I put a lot into it. So go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic right now, or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes and sign up for a paid subscription to Stand Up. Okay, now my second guest of the show is one of the most brilliant young writers and journalists working today, period. He has the respect of all types of people because he writes about all types of things pertaining to work and life and economics and politics and so much more. I've been talking with Derek Thompson for years now, and I'm so glad that he is still joining me here on the podcast. We had a wonderful conversation about a few of his most recent pieces, including American elites still don't understand how COVID-19 works, also how civilization broke our brains, and the most important divide in American politics isn't race. So much more for Derek Thompson at his byline at The Atlantic. Also the author of the book Hitmakers and a regular talker on NPR's Here and Now, contributor to CBS News, on Twitter at DKTomp, THOMP. Here's my latest conversation with the brilliant Derek Thompson. One of my all-time favorite people to talk to joins me now. Derek Thompson is here, and we've been actually talking for about 15 minutes just about marketing ploys for interesting products. But basically, I admitted privately, and I'll now admit publicly, I can't even believe I'm doing this now. I'm going to have to edit it out. I'm saying it. I had a McRib, Derek, and we've been talking about the marketing of the McRib and everything that's behind it. It really is a fascinating world, those who market such products.
Yeah, it's a fascinating and meaningful job that they do. They take meat sludge and they put it into molds that are vaguely shaped like ribs, and they call it a McRib. And people lie to themselves and they say, "Oh yeah, I'm having a McRib." You're not having a McRib. You're having meat sludge that's been poured into a mold that has a little rivet in it or something. There's a little mound in it,
bone shape,
that is meant to look like this animal's rib. And you're lying to yourself, and you are participating in this international lie that is the McRib. But was it good?
No, actually, no. Surprisingly, no. Okay. I really did not think it was. And I also have that shame and guilt accompanying it, and I'm experiencing it right now, and it makes for a little bit of bubbles of trouble in the tum-tum. I'm not gonna lie to you. What is the worst product that you've fallen for? I'm putting you on the spot if you can think of something, like any kind of really over-marketed. I mentioned the Lucky Charms kind of granola bar earlier as well, but I feel like you're pretty healthy in general, but
I try to be pretty healthy, but that's probably where they get me. Like I buy these $15 salads from Sweet Green, and then I think about what it would cost to essentially recreate that salad if I went downstairs to my Trader Joe's and just grab some kale and threw some chopped tomatoes in there. Then I am paying, $13.50 for if I walk down the street, and that's a 75-cent salad. So that's probably where they get me, but that's not meat sludge in the molds. When I'm actually, here's what it is. I am about to go on a cross-country road trip with my wife to meet up with my friends in Colorado, in a little cabin in Colorado. And so we will be driving through all of these Chick-fil-A's and Burger Kings and McDonald's. So I'll probably have a better answer to this question.
I can't wait till our next conversation.
But I'm looking forward to eating absolutely everything that Chick-fil-A has to offer, because I do love.
Keep a journal. Maybe you'll write an article about the experience, but we'll definitely talk about it next time we talk for sure. Okay. So speaking of which, so you're traveling across the country, and we're all wondering about what the rules should be and who do we look to for the rules. You have a great piece at The Atlantic, which I want to discuss, titled "American Elites Still Don't Understand How COVID-19 Works. 9 months in the pandemic, government leaders can't comprehend or refuse to clearly say what this virus is or how it spreads, and what it's led to is so much confusion at every level of government. Where do we start? How have our leaders gotten it so wrong? Not only our leaders, you mentioned leaders in other countries as well.
Yeah, well, let's start with the obvious. The obvious is that Trump has just been a horror show on this issue, and obviously so have Republican leaders, and so have all of the COVID deniers that exist as the rank and file underneath that sort of epistemically screwed up party. At the same time, though, the reason I wrote this article is that it's sort of obvious, I think, to a lot of liberals that Republicans have screwed up, but it should be clearer to liberals the way that liberal leadership has screwed up as well. So you just look at what's happening in a place like Los Angeles or a place like Philadelphia. Los Angeles has an ordinance that prohibits two friends from going on a socially distanced walk on the beach. At one point in December, they had closed down the city's playgrounds, even as they opened up the malls. In Philadelphia, it was also illegal to even drink beer outside with a neighbor. This is ridiculous. Like, we know how this disease spreads. And I have a slightly idiosyncratic way of describing this disease. I think I call it a talking disease. And the reason I call it a talking disease is that if you actually look at the most common modes of transmission, it's not people sneezing on each other. It's not people coughing on each other. It's people talking to each other. There's huge asymptomatic spread. And so the way this spreads is people talking to each other in closed, unventilated spaces. It's much, much less likely that you infect someone if you're outside, especially if you're keeping a little bit of distance. So we should be encouraging, as leaders, Republicans and Democrats, we should be giving money to indoor businesses, encouraging them to shut down so that people don't get sick from those businesses, while at the same time, we should be encouraging people to go outside and reclaim as much normalcy as possible. And instead, you have all these leaders that are doing the exact opposite. They're shutting down the beaches. They're shutting down the playgrounds. And they're also like, oh, yeah, please, like, go ahead, go to the malls. This is just the opposite of where the science is pointing us on this issue.
It also corresponds, obviously, with where money is made. Money is not made as much in beaches and parks and sidewalks as it is in bars, restaurants, and gyms. I mean, so
this
the pressure.
This is a really important point, okay. Right? And what you're pointing out is like, well, yes, Derek, you're making an obvious point that they're shutting down places that are actually businesses and keeping open places that are not businesses. And the reason why is that businesses make money, and if they don't make the money, then people are going to lose their jobs and they're going to be unemployed.
Yeah.
That's true. And what that, I think, does is it shifts our focus back up to the federal level. You could make decisions based on the science if there were federal bailouts for restaurants or federal bailouts for bars. But because that federal policy doesn't exist, you essentially are having these local leaders say, well, we're going to keep this bar open until the New York ordinances. We're going to keep the bars and gyms open until 10 p.m., as if the virus only comes out at 10:01. We're going to keep the bars open until 10 p.m. And we're otherwise going to shut them down. But this is a compromise that is created because they don't want the bars to fire all their employees and the gyms to fire all their employees. I get that. But the fault there lies at the federal level, I suppose.
And I think you also have a great sense in here, a clueless seesaw between overly restrictive and overly accommodating policies. The laboratories of democracy have become specialists in reactive adhocracy as hospitalizations spike to an all-time high. I feel bad for the states because the states have to balance their budget. And so the states are saying the best thing we can do for everybody is shut everything down. And the people are saying, if you shut me down, I can't pay my bills and feed my family. And the states are like, well, sorry, but that's what the federal government is supposed to do. They're supposed to pay us at least a high percentage of whatever we make, whatever scheme they want to come up with. And obviously, they can't get it together to do it because Mitch McConnell's busy confirming judges or whatever you want to blame. But how am I with feeling bad for the states?
So I think you are half right. I feel bad for the states that they have to essentially make these determinations about whether or not to keep open an indoor bar and risk people getting sick and dying if they get drinks in this close and ventilated space in there, or shutting down the business, forcing the bar to close down, killing the business, pushing a lot of people on unemployment. That's a really difficult decision to make. What's not a difficult decision to make is whether or not you should shut down playgrounds, whether or not you should shut down beaches, whether or not you should say, as a matter of local law, two friends are not allowed to have a beer outside their condo or go on a walk in the park. This is the stuff that just doesn't make any sense and actually has nothing to do with federal policy. Yeah. It is simply a profound misunderstanding of how this disease spreads.
That's self-inflicted. There's really no excuse for that. And that makes even the most kind of rule-following liberal supporter of a governor of a government saying, don't tell me I can't have a beer outside with my buddy. Come on with that.
Right. And this
don't
is
take away my
why,
freedom.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I think it's actually really, really important for governors to communicate both the strictness of some of these messages while also saying we want to keep as much of the world open for people to reclaim normalcy in their lives as possible. Like, Southern California is beautiful. like people should want to go to the beach. And it just doesn't seem like beaches are super spreader events. So we should be more methodical about saying this place is open. It's outside. The aerosols that come from people's mouths when they talk is likely to disperse. People are unlikely to get sick in these environments. We want to keep them open. We want people to remain happy, because the longer that they are living semi-normalish lives, the longer that single people are actually allowed to see other single people outside, and it's not like a violation of local law for them to go on a socially distanced outside date, they're more likely to buy in to the policies that do sting a bit, because they're saying the government has allowed me to essentially live a semi-normal life, but to do so outside. If you shut everything down, if you're basically like friends can't go on walks anymore, then you're just asking the public to revolt, in which case you swing right back from overly restrictive to overly accommodating. Right. And then you have to do the whole thing all over again.
I feel like also liberals or Democratic governors especially have handed the right another argument by saying you've got to close your churches, but we're going to keep bars, or in my case, they haven't really, but, comedy clubs, other places open. And that also seems like you just be consistent. We're not attacking religion. We're attacking a place where a bunch of people go every week and often sing and stand close to each other. It has nothing to do. By the way, the solution for that was always like, have mass outside. I mean, like there are ways to get around it. But I feel like they've kind of been inconsistent there and looked bad.
Yeah. And so I wrote a piece a few months ago that got me a lot of nasty emails. It was called, it did not have a very polite headline. The headline was "Mask Up and Shut Up." And the thesis of the piece was there's a lot of focus on mask ordinances for good reason. Masks do a pretty good job of reducing this sort of aerosol-based or spray-based spread of the disease. But this is a talking disease. 90-ish% of this disease is spread by talking. Another good way to block aerosols from being produced by speech is just not talking. So I don't know why no one seems to have tried something like library rules in public spaces. I'm not suggesting police going around, like it's Footloose or something, looking at people who are talking a little bit loudly and pulling them right into the car and bringing them down to the station. But when you're in a CVS, when you're in a grocery store, when you're in these kind of places where people have to come together, it is an essential part of life that they get their drugs, they get their lettuce, they get their tomatoes. Why not just have a sign that says from the CDC, this is a talking disease, wear a mask and keep your voices down? That would be, from the scientists that I've spoken to, that would be incredibly important for limiting the spread of this disease. I'm
making the assumption that when you speak more quietly or keep your voice down, you're less likely to spittle. Is that?
That's right. Yeah, right. The spittle quotient is reduced.
Have you ever looked at your iPhone after a long conversation where you're holding it to your ear or a speaker? It's even if you're talking at a normal rate. If you want to know how much you're spitting, just look at your iPhone screen. It's disgusting, but it usually means you've had a thoughtful conversation. Let me get to politics with you, because you are really, everything you do is interesting, but this is a very interesting piece about the election. Shortly after the election, your piece at The Atlantic titled, "The Most Important Divide in American Politics Isn't Race. The polarization of place and the depolarization of race are the stories of the moment." And for the first time, at least based on a headline, I was like, I don't think Derek knows what he's talking about. It's always, I'm the guy who always goes, it's always race. But you make really great points about the places that we live in and how our politics are based on that. And there's a lot of data for it. What are you saying?
So let me just give me a little bit of string for sort of laying out where I'm coming from with this article. It is absolutely a fact that different ethnic groups in America vote incredibly differently. And I'm not arguing otherwise. It is a fact that Black Americans vote something like 90% for Democrats, whereas white Americans vote something in the mid-40s for Democrats. So race matters. And I'm not suggesting that race doesn't matter at all. Right. But what I'm interested in this article is what are the long-term forces that determine the evolution of the electorate, and what can we see that's changed dramatically between 2016 and 2020, right? So I'm interested not only in where things lay, but how they're changing, how they're moving. So how are they changing and how they're moving? I think the two most important things to talk about when explaining the evolution of the electorate, not race, it's density and it's diplomas. More and more, you see that dense cities and their inner suburbs are becoming Democratic strongholds. They're all voting for Democrats. Of the 20 largest cities in America, all 20 voted for Joe Biden.
Oh, wow.
The largest city whose county voted for Donald Trump, number 24, Oklahoma City. So the top 23 all voted for Joe Biden. Overall, cities vote for Democrats. That is a really important trend because the connection between density and capital D Democratic voting has gone up majorly. So that's density. What about diplomas? The most important distinction between the part of the electorate that has evolved toward Donald Trump and the part of the electorate that has shifted toward Democrats in the last 4 or 8 years has been non-college people overall, not just white men, but we've now seen also white women and even Black and Latino men moving toward Donald Trump without a college degree, and everyone with a college degree is shifting toward the Democratic Party. So if what you're interested in is not just where does the electorate lay with Republicans, with Black Americans clearly to the left of white Americans, but how is the electorate evolving, the two most important points are density and diplomas.
We only have a little bit of time left, and I want to ask you more questions about that. It's super fascinating, but you should read all of Derek's work at The Atlantic Magazine and subscribe to it and follow him on Twitter. But your most recent piece is so important and interesting to me, and I've been reading a lot. I'm really fascinated with a lot of your work and others as well, talking about work-life balance and purpose and dignity of work and how work is changing and the future of work. But this piece is looking a lot at history, and it's so good. It's fascinating. It's even funny at times. It's titled How Civilization Broke Our Brains. What can hunter-gatherer societies teach us about work, time, and happiness? And so my first question is, what are the Sunday scaries? Never heard that.
The Sunday scaries are that flood of anxiety that I think a lot of people feel late on a Sunday evening as the weekend is winding down, and they're thinking about whether or not they should be working. And in the piece, I say, I think about this as being a kind of tug of war between two different modes that we can be in. One mode is sort of productivity mode. That's the mode we're in when we are working, or the mode we're in when we're sort of worrying about work. We're evaluating whether or not like our second to second behavior is going to cash out in terms of people congratulating us on a job well done, maybe getting a raise, maybe getting a promotion, changing jobs. That's productivity mind. But obviously there's lots and lots of moments in our life that are not productivity mind. It's leisure mind. It's when we're drinking a glass of water, we're having a conversation with a friend, we're lost in the beauty of the moment, and we're not thinking about how this is going to cash out for our career at all. That's leisure mind. And I think that a lot of Americans have difficulty toggling between productivity mind and leisure mind. They sit down to watch a movie, but they're still thinking about work, or they're at work, or at our desk, at our kitchen table, doing work as a white collar worker. But in the back of their mind, they're actually thinking about something related to their family, or they're going online to look at a YouTube video. I've said before that work and leisure now are leaky. They are leaking into each other in a way they didn't used to. And this is a piece about how to make work and leisure less leaky, and how difficult it has been, even for these hunter-gatherers that are sometimes often proclaimed as masters of leisure time. They really did not work very much. They were incredible at protecting their leisure time, but they were very diligent about it. And protecting leisure is, I think, such an important un-American virtue that I would like to become an American virtue.
That's such a really interesting thought, that protecting, you're absolutely right. We're so conditioned otherwise. But where does the need to feel busy, to feel productive, to feel like our time is structured and planned out, where does all that come from?
So I think this is a huge philosophical, anthropological question.
Yeah.
Where does modern anxiety come from? Let me offer a sort of purposefully simplistic answer, because I think it gets us a surprising amount of the way to the answer. I think it's that we think about the future a lot more than our hunter-gatherer ancestors. That when you lived as a hunter-gatherer, especially in a savanna or jungle-ish area where you really counted on the local nut and fruit and, bison environment to be able to feed you. And this does appear to be the case, that our hunter-gatherer ancestors ate and slept very, very well. There's no concern about the future. In fact, there's no real possibility of change in the future. People lived like this for tens of thousands of years. And modern society is obsessed with change. We're obsessed with thinking about how our lives are going to change and the lives of our families, and thinking about whether our status is going up or down relative to where it was yesterday. And I think that in a weird way, so this is a beautiful thing. The ability to think about the future is probably at the root of progress. Like, you cannot have progress in a society without brilliant scientists and technologists imagining a future that doesn't exist, that is better than the present and trying to get us there, right? An ability to be future oriented is at the heart of progress. But at the same time, I think too often people lose themselves in the unreal corridors of life. We spend so much of life living in the past, living in reminiscences, not nostalgia, but in rumination, and living in the anxieties of the future. What will become of me? What will become of my work and my family? And those unreal corridors of life pull us out of the present. And what we know from sociology, from psychology, from history, is that to the extent that there is a time-based definition of happiness, happiness is the ability to lose yourself in the present. And if you lose yourself in the unreal corridors of time of past and future, then you are just truly lost. And so I think that the future in this way is like a bit of a monkey's paw. It's a bit of a curse, that it has given us an ability to imagine things that don't exist, and that has given us progress. But it also has given us an ability to divorce ourselves from reality, from the here and now, from the present that is actually the source of happiness. And that is the root of modern anxiety.
There's so much more to this piece, the research that you did, the people you talked to. And if you want to know more about how fire changed everything, you're going to have to subscribe to The Atlantic and read Derek Thompson's most recent piece, How Civilization Broke Our Brains. Hey, I thought to ask you if you're allowed to tell us what you're working on next. You always have. I was like, I wonder how he thinks of his book ideas. Like, I bet you're working on a book. I would imagine.
I'm working on a book right now. The book is actually very related to this. Throughout this year, even though I've been really just fascinated by learning about the pandemic and learning about the scientists that are trying to solve the pandemic. And I don't know if you talk to people about synthetic mRNA technology, which is behind the vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer, but it's completely fascinating stuff. And I realized that I really wanted to write a book about the people doing the coolest, biggest shit in science. Like, who's going to save us from climate change? Who's going to get us to Mars? Who's going to find a way to use genetic editing to solve things like schizophrenia? Who's going to be able to design stronger fruits and vegetables that can survive for months so that the farmers in Africa that grow them can make money from them before they rot, which is the problem in world hunger. We grow enough food to feed the world. We don't grow enough food that survives the trip to market. And in the distribution transit, it dies and people go hungry. So I was like, what if I could write a book about the people solving the biggest, coolest shit, and what those stories of people working on world-saving technology tell us about how work and innovation actually works out.
Exciting. I knew you'd have something awesome up your sleeve. Thank you very much for joining me, as always, Derek. I really appreciate it. Great stuff.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Pete.
Isn't he great? Isn't Derek Thompson great? I love that kid. I always call him a kid because he always seems so young to me. And yet he's so brilliant, and it's hard to just keep up with him. I love reading his articles in The Atlantic, every one of them. Check him out. I subscribe to The Atlantic magazine. You ought to. I highly recommend it. And he is on Twitter. Tell him you heard him on the show at DKTH WOMP. Give him a follow. Say, I love when you join Pete Dominic on his podcast or something like that, because it always encourages great guests like Derek to come back and join me here on this new independent platform. All right, speaking of which, can't do it without your support, so please sign up for a paid subscription and also join me, if you do, on Thursday night, the standing Thursday night stand-up happy hour. And we always get like 50 to 75 people joining us, and it's always a great time. Such an amazing group, and we love welcoming new folks into our lovely, thoughtful, fun community. Also, Tim Wise is going to join us Thursday night. Dispatches from the Race War is his book. He'll be there. You can always hang out in the Discord platform. I've got to check in. It's been a couple days since I actually jumped in there, but whenever I'm feeling alone, I can go in there and eavesdrop, hang out, start a conversation, whatever. And that all comes with your subscription. So please sign up now. That's it. You're not alone. I love you. Hang in, everybody. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Have fun holiday activities. Do good, healthy things. Get outside and send me your nature pictures. Take it away, John Carroll.
Get up off of your butt, down off of your fence, even